thanks for stopping by. Before we get started today, I just wanted to take a few minutes and thank everybody for subscribing to my channel. We just passed our 1,000 subscription. I'm so excited for the content that I'm going to create in 2021. So stick around and let's see what we've got going today. So what are we going to cover today? If you're brand new to lasers and you're brand new to LightBurn, this is a video for you. What I've done is I've used a laser for about a year now. I've used LightBurn for about a year now. And what I did is I kind of looked back on the things that I use on a continual basis, and we're going to cover those in some tips and tricks today. So stay tuned, let's check it out. Okay, I'm going to show you a number of tips that you'll be able to use just about on every project you do in LightBurn. I find myself using most all of these most of the time. If you learn these and understand why you would want to use them, it will save you quite a bit of time. So the first thing, the tip number one will be if you have a mouse and it's got a scroll wheel on the top of the mouse, that's a great way to move around your canvas. If I use the scroll mouse and roll it forward or backwards, you can see that I can zoom into places and zoom out. I can hold the scroll mouse wheel down and pan, and it's just a lot quicker way to move around. It'll be a great way for you to start getting around your design space in LightBurn. Tip number two is going to be, especially when you're starting off, the thing that you want to always want to do is create a boundary for your project. Let's say that you were going to want to engrave on a small coaster, a small slate coaster, and you wanted to do a fairly simple design, and you wanted that design to be right in the middle of the coaster that you purchased. The way you would do that is you would come over here, grab your rectangle tool, hold your left mouse button down, pull it out, let it go. I don't worry too much about what size it is, because one of the things that you'll be able to do a lot is come up here and dial in exactly what your width and your height of your coaster is going to be. I measured my coaster with a little caliper, and it's 3.94 by 3.94. You might wonder, well, gee, why didn't we just round it off to 4 inches? And the reason why we want this frame that we're going to start working on with our design, it needs to be as accurate as it can be. And the reason I say that is we're actually going to use this frame to actually outline the coaster to make sure that the slate coaster is in the bed of the laser correctly, so you can get this design that you're going to put in here exactly where you want it. So this tip, I use frames on just about everything I do, whether it's a wood picture, a coaster, a cutting board. It just doesn't matter. The first thing that I do is I measure up the extents of my project, or even if it's just a big piece of wood and I'm going to be doing a number of things on that piece of wood, I will make a frame that's the dimensions of that wood and then work within that. And you'll see when we get to the laser portion of these tips how valuable that is. So just keep in mind, always build yourself a frame and then work within your framework for your design. Now that we've got our rectangle all set up for our coaster, we're going to need a design to bring in and place in the middle of this coaster. You'll notice I've got an art library down here. I will go ahead and put a link to how you generate one of these art libraries up above. And this is a tool that I use a lot that we won't get into today, but look at that video and you can see how helpful these can be. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just drag in a design, and I'm going to hold the control button down and just blow this up a little bit. And I'm going to drag it in the middle of that coaster. And you can see now that we have 2 different layer colors. One of the things that confused me, or that I struggled with a little bit when I started with LightBurn, is how these colored layers work and what they mean and how they function. And so I'm going to spend a few minutes on kind of how all this works. So this would definitely be tip number 3, is learning how to navigate your cut and layers panel. Okay, you notice since I generated and drug in another layer, we've got 2 different colors here. And the thing that you want to remember about LightBurn is each color will do a very specific thing. And so depending on what you want to do, in this particular case, this layer, the black layer, is just the representation of the outline of the slate coaster that we're going to use. The blue layer shows that we're going to engrave something in the middle of this coaster, and I'm going to show you how to assign these colors and a couple of things that you need to know about this cut layers panel. So let's talk a little bit about kind of what these are and how these functions. The first thing that I will tell you is you can drag this out so you can see these. The first thing that I will tell you is when I started to use LightBurn, the first thing I would do is I would come in here. You can rename your layers, but one of the things that you always want to remember is whatever you name this layer, it's going to be that for all the future projects. So you want to keep your naming conventions for your layers at a fairly high level. So what I would do is I would normally name my black layer as frame, because I always have a frame on every project. And you'll notice now it says frame. And then down here, I would come in and it would probably say 02 or 01 like it does here. And I would change it to, okay, from now on, the blue layer is going to be my engrave layer. Okay, so just remember that whatever you put in here for descriptions and modes and settings, if we save this layer and then we go to a new project and you use the black layer and the blue layer, it's going to be identical, and you'll have to come in here and change these speeds and settings. So just know that your layers are kind of set. And so my suggestion would be is that you have one for your frame layer, one for your engrave layer, one for your cut layer, and so on. And then you can decide on how many different types of layers you want with different settings. That's kind of a personal preference. So know that you can name these. Know that whatever you name these and whatever speeds you select these for will remain when you select that layer on a future project. So they're not independent. They won't change any of the projects that you've got named prior to this, but just keep that in mind. This setting here, the first number is the speed and on how fast the laser head is going to travel. And the second reading is the percentage of power that you've assigned to that particular layer. Then output means that we're going to actually output that to the laser, that the laser is going to do something with it. If I turn it off, you'll notice that it's still evident, but it dulls the color out. And if I turn it off, it disappears. Now it's still there, it's just out of view. So usually the way I set my frame up is I turn the output off, at least for right now, and then all of the rest of my layers will be on. Okay, if I double click this, you can open this layer and you can change your name here. You can put in your speed, your power. We're not getting into all these different settings. That's for another time, but this is just some basic information on the Cut Layers tab. Okay, you'll also be able to switch from one layer to another as far as your settings are concerned by this little tab down here. You don't have to go back and forth. You can just change things here. There's some buttons down here that we're not going to talk about just yet. So the name of your layer, the mode, the speed and how fast your laser is going to travel, the power that you're assigning for that particular layer. And the other thing that you'll keep in mind is the way you have the layers stacked is exactly the way the laser is going to cut it. So now that you've got your layer, your two layers here named at a high level, the next is mode. I will go ahead and link a video up top here to a video that I did that just involves what these different features mean. Once you understand what the line command, the fill plus line command is, it'll make a lot more sense to you on how this functions. And so please take a look at that video. It will demystify kind of what you're seeing here. One of the first things that I noticed when I was starting to use LightBurn is when I opened this up, I saw that there was no cut mode. Well, that's because a cut mode is just basically a line mode, a line mode with a lot more power associated with it. And that video that's linked above there will talk about that. So take a look at that video. These are fairly straightforward once you understand how they function. Check that out. This next section is for speed and power. The first one is the speed that your laser is traveling and the percentage of power that you're assigning to this particular laser. Now, what's nice about what Thunder Laser does is they actually provide a material library for each particular laser that they sell. And so this is for my Thunder 60 watt. And if you come down here to plywood and you were looking at 1/8 inch, they already have one that's predetermined, and so gives you a great place to start. And then if I wanted to engrave, I just come up here to plywood, no thickness, come over here and assign to layer, and boom, now I'm ready to go. So having an art library, or excuse me, a material library is very handy. That's how you can get started in your speed and power. Again, a lot of these will have to be tweaked just a little bit based on your preference, but it gives you a great head start. So be sure you look at the materials library if you own and operate a Thunder laser. The output is fairly obvious. If it's on, that means that the laser will try to do that function. If you turn it off, that means that it still shows, it still gives you an indication, but nothing's going to happen as far as a laser is concerned. It's strictly there for a reference. And then the show button is where it actually turns it on or turns it off. Learning how these cut and layers panel works is really the heart and soul of your design and how it turns out. So spend a little time with this. Once you've gone through a couple of projects, you'll see how easy it is to use. The other thing that I will tell you about the cut and layers panel is the way your layers are stacked is exactly the way it's going to function. So if you had both of these on, it's going to put a line around the frame first, and then it's going to engrave the middle. And so when you get going on your projects, in some cases, you're going to want to do your engrave first and then a cut. Let's say you were going to cut this out of a piece of wood or something like that, and you were going to engrave this heart and dog paw print on a piece of wood. You always want to do your engraving first and then your cutting out action after that. So just keep that in mind. Tip number 4 is to turn your object snaps on. This is really helpful for beginners just because it'll take some of the guesswork out of centering things and those kind of things. If we come up here to the little gears here and we open it up and we come right down here to snapping, you've got two options. You've got snap to objects, which I almost always have on, and then snap to grid. It just depends on what you're doing. You can have them both on if you like. I find that snap to objects is really handy, and this is where you would either come in and turn it on or off. So we're going to turn that on, and watch what happens. If I have this design that I want to put in the middle of this frame, if I grab this middle handle and I just start to drag it over kind of in the middle, it automatically snaps to the middle of the coaster frame. Okay, tip number 5. If you're fairly new, and I use this all the time still, it's called the notes feature. And so if you come up here, you've got your file open and you say show notes, this dialog box pops up. And what's nice about this, especially if you're doing something that you haven't done before, or maybe you're dialing in some settings and you need to remember what you've done to make it work great, is you go ahead and put in your notes, and it stays with this file. The good thing about this is now you don't have to put the text on the workspace. You can actually put it somewhere else where it's not affecting your design, or you don't have to worry about it being involved in your design space. The other thing that's a nice feature is if for some reason you forgot or you didn't remember that you took some notes, you can go ahead and turn this on. And then next time, if I save this file and I reopen the file, that notes section will actually pop up when it opens, which is nice. So like in a situation where you're dialing in a new process and you haven't done it before, but you finally got it all figured out and you've made your good notes here, this note feature here is very handy. You can go ahead and record what worked, what didn't work, the settings that you used, the materials that worked best, and it's all right here. Tip number 6. One of the things about LightBurn that's a little bit different from other graphic programs is that it doesn't have rulers or guides that you might be used to on other programs. And so in order to be able to do certain layouts that are very specific in layout parameters, you've got to use rectangles, those kind of things. And I like to use these tool layers. These are new to LightBurn. They've only just added these just in the last couple of releases, but they're really helpful for this. So let's imagine that this black line is 18 inches wide by 12 inches high. And let's assume for a minute that it's either a piece of wood or a cutting board. It really doesn't matter what it is. But you're going to put some text on this cutting board. And you want to make sure that you've got a 1-inch border all the way around the inside of this cutting board. Okay. A couple of things you can do. You could use the offset feature. Come in here and offset it to the inside by 1 inch, and there's your guides. And then you could just delete it. That's assuming that you want a 1-inch border all the way around. The other option that I use probably more often, because very rarely are they the same all the way around, is I like to start a rectangle. And I'm going to go ahead and turn this into, from an engrave layer, the blue layer, I'm just going to make sure that it's active. And I'm going to go ahead and select one of the tool layers. And you'll notice that it turns it orange. And you'll also notice that there is no settings for this. This is just basically used for text alignment, those kind of things. But let's say that we wanted an inch on the top and the bottom and 2 inches on the sides. So I'll show you how quick that can be done. So we have our rectangle here. We're going to say, we're going to activate it. And then we're going to come up here and we're going to say, give me a 1-inch height. And I'm going to duplicate it. And then I'm going to grab one. And this is where, if you have your snap to objects on, which is right here, if you have your snap to objects on, this is where it becomes very handy. So all I got to do is grab anywhere on that rectangle and get it close to the other object, and it'll snap right to it. Now I've got my guides for the top and the bottom. Let's make the guides for the sides. So I'll go ahead and duplicate that. I'm going to just bring it down here, and I'm going to hit one of the things that you'll want to learn is if you learned how to use a rotate tool, it's just the period key, and that'll rotate that around. Okay, and let's say that I snap that over to here. I can shorten it up if we want. And this we want to make 2 inches wide. And we snap that right to there, and I'm going to duplicate that. Grab that and pull it over here. So now we've got all of our guides that we need for our layout. So the parameters were that we wanted it 1 inch off the top, 1 inch off the bottom, and 2 inches off the sides. So now if we had some text that we were going to drop in here, we select it and drag it in. We can actually come up here and we can snap it right to that line. We can drag this over here, drag this over here. Got that done. Using the scroll wheel again, I'm going to snap it to this line. Then we're going to come up here and we're going to go ahead and snap it right there in that corner. Snap it there. This over here. Stretch this over here. And there we have it. So now this just gives you a simple example of how you can use these tool layers as guides, rectangles basically, that are predetermined in size and that will snap to other objects, where you can use those for layout rulers or layout guides, and you don't ever have to worry about they'll never be output to your laser. Tip number 7. One of the things, other than learning your cuts and layers palette, one of the other things that you're going to have to set for your laser to function properly is this start from drop-down box. I will put a link up top so you can go to the video that I've already done on these settings: absolute coordinates, current position, user origin. All 3 of them have their place, but in all honesty, I like the user origin the best, primarily because I can drive the laser head to wherever I want it to be in the in whatever position I want it to be, hit the origin button on the controller, and with that, I know that that laser is going to start in that green box wherever it's illustrated. So in my mind, it's a lot more user-friendly. The laser's not dictating to you where it's doing its work. You're dictating to it where you want it to work. So take a look at the video that's attached, and it'll go over all 3 start from features: absolute coordinates, user origin, and current position. Okay, we're going to go ahead and take this 4-inch coaster and we're going to go ahead and place it on our bed. It really doesn't matter where it is, because we're going to drive the laser head to where we want to work, not where the laser dictates we need to work. So what we'll do is I'll use the left and right arrows, the up and down arrows on the Rueda controller, and we'll just go right arrow and then down arrow, and we'll just get this in the ballpark. You can see the little red dot pointer right here, and you know, we're going to just start right there. Now what I'm going to do from here is I'm going to go ahead and push the origin button on the Rueda controller, and that's going to set my user origin. You want to make sure that you set user origin in LightBurn as well. So what I'll do is I'll push the origin button. That's done, and now what we're going to do is we're going to go back to LightBurn and we're going to select to frame this frame that we did in the software, and that way we can assure that when this laser nozzle or laser head goes around, it will show us if we're square or not. And then from that, once we get this laid out and make sure that it's all square, we know that the symbol that we're going to put in the middle of this coaster is going to be right in the middle. We don't have to worry about being off center or anything like that. So the next thing is we're going to go back to LightBurn and we're going to use the frame function to make sure we've got this coaster where it needs to be. Okay, so we're getting ready to frame our work. One thing that we want to do to frame our work here is we're going to take our frame layer, our black layer, and turn it on for just a minute. And we're going to turn off our fill layer, our design. And so it shows that the black or the frame is selected. And if we want to know what the laser is going to do, remember you can always use the preview window, and I would highly recommend that because what you see here is what you're going to get. This is exactly what we want to happen, is to just have the laser follow the outline of the coaster. And so now I'm going to come down here to this frame button, and when I push this frame button, the laser head should follow the edge of the coaster. Now if it's a little bit misaligned, you just tweak a little bit and push the frame button again, and pretty soon after a couple, 2 or 3 tries, you've got it right on the money. So I'm going to push the frame button. And it looks like we're in pretty good shape. We've got it framed up. If you need to make an adjustment, move your coaster a little bit and hit this frame button, and it won't take you any time at all to get this lined up. Here's tip number 8. If for some reason the speed of that laser head is going too fast for you to determine whether it's where it needs to be, go to your Move tab. If you don't see your Move tab, come up here to Window and make sure that your Move tab is selected, and then you'll see it. If you go to your Move tab, right here under Speed, this is where you can change the framing speed of your laser. So you can see it's set at 100 millimeters per second, which is pretty fast. It's hard to really see what's going to happen. So let's go ahead and change this to, let's say, 25 millimeters per second. And we'll frame it again and see if it makes a difference. So this is at 25 millimeters per second. We're going to frame it again. Much better. You can see that I can actually see exactly where that red dot is following the edges of that slate coaster. Great. So tip number 8 is you can change your framing speed right here. Make sure you dial it in. If you turn it way down for some reason, just remember you need to turn it back up for it to go back to a faster framing speed. Tip number 9 is going to be this other frame button that we have. This is called the rubber band function. Basically, what it means is if I stretched a rubber band over our design, it's going to basically trace the outline. So let's go to our cut layers, turn our frame off and our design on, select our design, make sure that's what we're going to get. And now what it's going to do is it's actually going to trace the extent. So if you actually stretched a rubber band over this design, that's going to kind of give you the outline on the slate coaster. So let's do that. So this is a great feature for unusually shaped designs where you really can't determine, whether it's centered or not. This will give you a lot better idea than just a square. If I used this frame button, you'll see that it just traces this square of the outside extents of our design compared to this frame button. This framing button is a great feature if you're putting something on wood and you need to make sure that you're missing a knot or there's something that's critical with your design. You can make sure that you miss it with this frame button. So I use both of these frame buttons a lot. Between these two frame buttons and you being able to change the speed of your frame, you'll be able to dial this right in. You shouldn't have any reason why you can't center a design on your piece of work. Okay, so we have our coaster all framed up. We're sure that this symbol is going to be in the middle of our coaster. So what we're going to do is we're going to make sure that we have our frame off, because we don't want the laser to do anything as far as the frame is concerned, to make sure that our engrave layer is on. Then the next thing that you're always going to want to do is preview. I would get in the habit of doing this, because you'll be amazed on how many times you'll catch yourself where the laser is going to do something that you don't expect. So this preview button up here is your friend. You want to use it a lot. And so you can see that it's basically going to go back and forth and engrave this heart and paw print. That's exactly what we wanted, so we're good there. It's going to take roughly 3 minutes to do. Now, one thing that Thunder Laser does that I really like is they provide a library, a materials library for many different things, but they're just guidelines. One of the things that you're going to want to do is you're going to want to learn how to tweak your settings in the Rueda Controller, and I'm going to show you how to do that today. So we're going to just take this default setting, and we're probably going to need to adjust it to dial it in. One of the more frustrating things about a laser is all materials are just a little bit different. So just because they give you a starting point for a particular material doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work just the way you want it. So what you'll need to do is learn how to make adjustments on your Rueda controller on the fly. And that's what we're going to do next. So what we want to do is we've previewed it. We know that we're getting what we expect. So I want to send this file over to the laser. I'm going to come over here and I'm going to hit send. Okay, you can name it. And now it's sitting over in the Rueda controller. Okay, once we've sent the file over from the LightBurn, we're going to go in here and say File. And the most recent file should be on top. We're going to say Enter to select that file. Our design should show up, and then our speed and our power should show up as well. And then if we wanted to, we could always frame it here. We could push the frame button. It does the same thing as the one in LightBurn, except the one in LightBurn you can control a little bit easier. You can change the speed of the frame rate a little easier than you can from here. So I usually frame most of my projects via LightBurn and not here. And at this point, if everything else is ready, we're ready to go ahead and push start. As you can see that it's pretty light. And so what we're going to do is I hit the pause. I'm going to come up here to max power, and it was set at 15%. That's not quite enough. So we're going to come up here to maybe 18%, hit enter, and then hit start again. And you can say, wow, that really made a big difference in our result. Pause press again. Let's try a little bit higher just for fun. Max power, 19%. Enter. Start. Max power. Let's go to 20%. Enter. Start. This is a great way to kind of dial in your material settings. What I normally do is I pick a speed and leave it alone and then play with the power, and that way you're not chasing your tail. But you can see these Rueda controllers are very easy to use. One of the biggest mistakes I made, probably for the first 4 or 5 months I owned this laser, is I really didn't do hardly anything in the controller. Once I learned that you could pause it, you could change your max power really seamlessly, it got me to dial in materials much faster. There, as you can see, where we started, there wasn't nearly enough power to do this slate coaster. Well, instead of going back to LightBurn, changing it there, resending it to the controller and running it from there, I just changed it in the controller on the fly. And then once you found the setting that worked for your material, just go ahead and change the setting, your power setting, in your file in LightBurn, save it, and you're good to go. But you can see how much difference. We went from 15 to 16 to 17 to all the way up to 20. And you can see if we just kept going up, it would start falling apart on us. So just remember, don't be afraid to play with your power on the fly. This is a great way, especially if you try to do pictures or something like this. Pictures are tricky. Well, as you can see, if you learn these top 10 tips, things can get a lot easier for you. Just remember that don't be afraid to explore some options on your Rueda controller. Like I said before, it probably took me 4 or 5 months before I realized that once I learned my way around that controller, life got a whole lot easier and faster for me to dial certain settings in. One of the things that I hear all the time is, you know, what are your settings? Well, just because my settings work on my machine doesn't mean those settings will work on your machine. So you have to have the ability to go ahead and kind of adjust on the fly and make it your own. I hope this information was helpful. Thanks so much for stopping by. Happy New Year. Have a great day.